The rain came down in sheets that autumn evening, turning the alleyway behind Fifth Avenue into a river of forgotten things. Most people hurried past without looking down. But 12-year-old Daniel Reyes had learned to see treasure where others saw trash. He knelt beside a dumpster, his worn sneakers soaking through, carefully extracting cardboard boxes from the recycling bin. His fingers, calloused beyond his years, moved with practiced precision. Each piece was examined, sorted, and tucked into the shopping cart he'd borrowed from his mother's cleaning job. Daniel wasn't collecting garbage. He was collecting possibility. In the cramped studio apartment he shared with his mother 3 blocks away, these discarded boxes would transform. By lamplight, after his homework was done, Daniel's hands would fold and cut and glue until cardboard became castles, dragons, entire worlds. He sold them at the weekend market for $5, sometimes $10 each, enough to help his mother with groceries. Enough to prove that poverty wasn't the end of someone's story. Still digging through trash, I see. The voice cut through the rain like a blade. Daniel looked up to find Victor Ashford standing under a gleaming black umbrella, his Italian leather shoes pristine despite the downpour. Victor was everything Daniel wasn't. 15 years old, dressed in a blazer that cost more than Daniel's mother made in a month, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about anything. They attended the same school, though they might as well have lived on different planets. Victor's father owned half the real estate in the city. Daniel's father had left before Daniel could remember his face. "I'm working," Daniel said quietly, returning to his boxes. Victor laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "Working? Is that what you call it?" He stepped closer, angling his umbrella so the rain poured onto Daniel's head. "My father says people like you will always be exactly where you are. He says it's because you don't have ambition. You don't have vision." Daniel stood slowly, water streaming down his face. He was shorter than Victor, younger, wetter, poorer. But his eyes held something that made Victor take an involuntary step back. "Your father's wrong," Daniel said softly. "I have plenty of vision. I just see things differently than you do." He pushed his cart past Victor, leaving wet footprints on the pristine sidewalk. Behind him, he heard Victor call out, "Enjoy your cardboard kingdom, garbage boy. That's all you'll ever have." Daniel didn't turn around. He'd heard worse. But something in Victor's words lodged in his chest like a splinter. Not because they hurt, but because they reminded him of what he already knew. The world was divided into people like Victor and people like him. And the people like Victor wrote the rules. That night, in their apartment that smelled of cleaning supplies and rain, Daniel's mother found him at the kitchen table. Maria Reyes had worked 3 jobs for as long as Daniel could remember. Cleaning offices at dawn, waiting tables at lunch, stocking shelves until midnight. Her hands were perpetually raw, her back constantly aching, but her eyes still held warmth when she looked at her son. "Rough day, Mijo?" she asked, setting down a plate of rice and beans, dinner and tomorrow's breakfast combined. Daniel shook his head, but his hands betrayed him, folding a piece of cardboard with more force than necessary. Maria sat down beside him, her fingers gently stilling his. "Tell me," she said simply. So he did. He told her about Victor and the rain and the words that shouldn't have mattered but somehow did. When he finished, Maria was quiet for a long moment, her thumb rubbing circles on the back of his hand. "You know what your grandmother used to tell me?" she finally said. She'd say, "Maria, the people who mock you for planting seeds will be the first to ask for shade from your tree." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Keep planting, Daniel. Keep building. Let them laugh. Trees don't grow to prove anything to anyone. They just grow." Daniel looked at his mother, at the exhaustion carved into her face, at the dreams she'd sacrificed so he could have a chance. "I'm going to buy you a house someday," he whispered, "with a garden. And you'll never have to work again." Maria's eyes filled with tears she was too proud to let fall. "I know you will, baby. I know you will." That night, Daniel stayed up until 3 in the morning working by lamplight. But he wasn't making toys to sell. He was making something different, a detailed model of a house, complete with a garden, with windows that caught imaginary light, with a door that opened to welcome someone home. He labeled it carefully on the bottom, "For Mama. Someday." The weekend market was Daniel's cathedral, a sprawling outdoor bazaar where immigrants and artists and dreamers sold everything from handmade jewelry to homemade empanadas. Daniel's spot was in the back corner, a folding table borrowed from the community center, his cardboard creations displayed like treasures in a museum. Most of his customers were parents buying gifts for their children, or grandmothers charmed by his politeness and craftsmanship. He made enough to help with rent, with groceries, with the slow accumulation of a future that felt very far away. But that Saturday, something different happened. An elderly woman approached his table, moving slowly with a cane, her white hair perfectly coiffed despite the autumn wind. She wore pearls and an expression of intense focus as she examined each of his creations. Daniel had learned not to judge customers by their appearance. Some of his best sales had come from people who looked like they couldn't afford $1. "You made all these yourself?" she asked, her voice cultured and precise. "Yes, ma'am. Every one." She picked up a cardboard dragon, holding it up to the light. The scales Daniel had painstakingly cut and layered caught the sun, creating shadows that made the creature seem almost alive. "This is remarkable. Really remarkable. Where did you learn to do this?" Daniel shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "YouTube mostly, and trial and error. A lot of error." The woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "The best education often is." She set down the dragon and met his eyes. "What do you want to be when you grow up, young man?" It was a question adults always asked, usually not caring about the answer. But something in this woman's gaze suggested she was actually listening. Daniel found himself answering honestly. "An architect," he said. "I want to design buildings that don't just look beautiful. I want them to make people feel safe, feel home." He paused, then added quietly, "My mom's never had that, a real home. I want to build her one." The woman nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she already suspected. She pulled out her wallet and extracted a crisp $100 bill. "I'll take the dragon. Keep the change." Daniel's eyes widened. "Ma'am, it's only $10. "I can't." "You can and you will." She pressed the bill into his hand, closing his fingers around it. "Consider it an investment." "I have a feeling about you, Daniel." She paused. "It is Daniel, isn't it? I saw your name on your display." "Yes, ma'am. Daniel Reyes." "Well, Daniel Reyes, remember this. The height of your dreams should always exceed the reach of your current circumstances. Otherwise, what's the point of dreaming?" She turned to leave, then glanced back. "Oh, and one more thing. Hold onto that model of the house under your table. The one labeled, "For Mama." Don't sell it. Keep it as a reminder." Before Daniel could ask how she'd seen it, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like a character from one of his cardboard stories. He looked down at the $100 bill in his hand, then at the space where the woman had stood. Around him, the market continued its chaotic symphony of commerce and community. But Daniel felt something shift inside him, a sense that the universe had just leaned in and whispered a secret he didn't yet understand. That night, he gave his mother $90 for rent. The other 10 he tucked into an envelope and labeled it, "First Investment in the Future." October 2015. 3 years passed like water through cupped hands. Fast and never quite enough. Daniel turned 15, then 16, each birthday marked not by parties but by incremental progress toward a future that felt simultaneously closer and impossibly far away. His cardboard creations evolved. What had started as simple toys became architectural models. Miniature buildings with working doors, windows that opened, roofs that lifted to reveal meticulously crafted interiors. He taught himself design software using the library's computers, staying until closing time, sketching and rendering until his eyes burned. His mother aged faster than she should have. New lines appeared around her eyes, her back bent a little more each month. But she never stopped believing in him, never stopped working those 3 jobs, never stopped being the foundation on which he built everything. Victor Ashford also changed, though not in ways that suggested growth. At 18, he'd perfected his father's arrogance, wearing it like the designer clothes that hung perfectly on his frame. He drove a BMW to school, dated girls who looked like models, and treated the world like a stage built for his performance. Their paths rarely crossed anymore. Daniel had learned to make himself invisible, to navigate the school's hallways like a ghost. But the universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. It happened on a Tuesday in April, during the school's annual career day. Students were encouraged to present their aspirations, to share portfolios and dreams with visiting professionals from various industries. Daniel had spent weeks preparing, creating a presentation about sustainable, affordable housing, designs that combined beauty with practicality, that could bring dignity to communities forgotten by developers who only saw profit margins. The presentation room was packed with students and professionals, including several prominent architects from the city. Daniel's hands shook as he set up his laptop, his physical models arranged carefully on the table before him. This was it, his chance to be seen, to be taken seriously. Then Victor walked in, late as always, trailed by his father. Richard Ashford was a legend in real estate, a self-made billionaire who'd built an empire on luxury developments and ruthless business practices. He was also one of the event's featured speakers. And as Victor whispered something in his father's ear, both of them looking directly at Daniel, he felt his carefully constructed confidence begin to crack. Daniel's presentation went well, at least at first. He spoke about designing housing for low-income families, about creating communities where children like him could grow up with dignity. His voice was steady, his passion evident. Several architects nodded appreciatively, making notes. Then Richard Ashford raised his hand. "Son," he said, the word dripping with condescension, "this is all very heartwarming, very idealistic, but let me give you some real-world advice." He stood, commanding the room with the ease of someone used to being the most important person anywhere he went. Architecture isn't about charity. It's a business. And in business, you serve the people who can pay for your services. He gestured at Daniel's models. "These little cardboard houses? They're cute, but they're not reality. Real architecture requires real money, real education, real connections. It requires coming from a world that understands value." He paused, letting the words hang. "I mean, no disrespect, but perhaps you'd be better suited for, let's say, construction work. Building what others design. There's no shame in that." The room fell silent. Daniel felt every eye on him, felt the weight of every assumption, every limitation the world wanted to place on him because of where he came from, because of what he didn't have. Victor was smirking in the back row. Daniel's hands clenched around the edge of the table. He thought of his mother, of her raw hands and bent back. He thought of that elderly woman at the market 3 years ago, of her words about dreams exceeding circumstances. He thought of every night he'd stayed up teaching himself, every sacrifice his mother had made, every person who'd told him, implicitly or explicitly, that he didn't belong. And something inside him hardened into diamond. "Mr. Ashford," Daniel said, his voice quiet but clear, "you're right about one thing. Architecture is about value. But we disagree on what value means." He stepped forward, meeting the older man's eyes. "You build for the wealthy because that's where you see profit. I want to build for everyone else because that's where I see humanity." He gestured at his models. "These cardboard houses represent real families, real children, people who deserve beauty and safety and dignity just as much as your luxury condo buyers. And someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but someday I'm going to prove that serving them isn't charity. It's justice. And it's the future." The room erupted in applause. Not from everyone, but from enough people that Daniel felt his heart rate slow, felt the ground steady beneath his feet. Several architects approached him after, asking for his contact information, praising his vision. But Richard Ashford just laughed, shaking his head as he left. And Victor, following his father, turned back to mouth two words, "Good luck." It sounded like a curse. The curse, as it turned out, was real, just not in the way Victor intended. 2 months later, on a June evening that smelled of summer and possibility, Maria Reyes collapsed at her second job. The restaurant manager found her in the storage room, unconscious, her pulse weak and erratic. The hospital bills arrived like predators, circling Daniel's dreams and tearing them to pieces. His mother needed surgery, needed medication, needed rest she couldn't afford to take. The insurance from her jobs, all three of them, covered almost nothing. The numbers on the bills might as well have been written in a language Daniel couldn't speak. Impossibly large, absurdly cruel. He withdrew from the advanced placement summer program he'd been accepted to, a program that would have looked perfect on college applications. He took a job at a warehouse, loading trucks from midnight to 8 a.m., then sleeping through the day before starting over again. His grades, once perfect, began to slip. His college applications sat untouched on his desk. His mother cried when she was strong enough to understand what he'd sacrificed. "Mijo, no," she whispered from her hospital bed. "Not your future. Not for me." "There is no future without you," Daniel said simply. And he meant it. But at night, alone in their apartment, staring at the architectural models gathering dust in the corner, Daniel felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel before: despair. Not the temporary sadness of a bad day, but the bone-deep understanding that the deck was stacked, the game was rigged, and people like him didn't win. They just survived. If they were lucky. Victor's father had been right. Dreams were for people who could afford them. The model house he'd built for his mother years ago sat on his desk, a reminder of promises he could no longer keep. Someday had become never. And in the darkness of that realization, Daniel felt something inside him begin to break. He was 17 years old, working a dead-end job, watching his mother waste away, his dreams evaporating like morning mist. This was his reality now. This was his life. The cardboard crown he'd built from scraps was crumbling. And there was no one coming to save him. Or so he thought. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late August, forwarded from the high school to his home address. Daniel almost threw it away. He'd grown accustomed to ignoring mail, as it usually brought only bills and disappointments. But something about the cream-colored envelope, the elegant script of his name, made him pause. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed on letterhead that read, "The Eleanor Morrison Foundation for Architectural Excellence. Dear Mr. Reyes, you don't know me, though we met briefly 3 years ago at a weekend market. You sold me a dragon, and you told me about wanting to build a home for your mother. I've been following your journey since then, your work, your dedication, your circumstances. I was one of the architects present at your career day presentation in April. I watched how you responded to dismissal with dignity and vision. I also learned, through contacts at your school, about your mother's illness and your subsequent withdrawal from academic opportunities. The world tells young people like you that success is linear, that if you stumble, you fall off the path entirely. But I've learned something in my 40 years as an architect. The most beautiful buildings often arise from the most challenging foundations. Enclosed is a full scholarship to the Stanford Architecture Program, including a stipend for living expenses and a separate fund to cover your mother's medical bills and allow her to stop working. The only conditions are these. You must pursue your dreams with the same passion you showed at that market when you were 12. And when you succeed, not if, but when, you must help someone else the way I'm helping you. I believe in you, Daniel. Now you must believe in yourself. With admiration, Eleanor Morrison." Daniel read the letter 3 times before his hands started shaking. He checked the envelope again and found a second document. A contract, official and legally binding, outlining everything the letter promised. It was real. It was actually real. He ran to the hospital, the letter clutched in his fist, and burst into his mother's room. Maria was awake, sitting up in bed, looking frilier than he'd ever seen her. But when Daniel read her the letter, when he explained what it meant, the color returned to her face like sunrise breaking over mountains. "You're going to Stanford, Mijo?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to become an architect." "We're going to California," Daniel corrected, taking her hand. "We're going to start over. You're never working 3 jobs again. You're going to rest. You're going to heal. And I'm going to build you that house." For the first time in months, Daniel felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Stanford was a revelation, not just the education but the validation. For the first time in his life, Daniel's background wasn't a liability. Professors valued the perspective he brought from understanding struggle, from seeing architecture not as abstract art but as the foundation of human dignity. He threw himself into his studies with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. But he never forgot where he came from. Every semester, he returned to his old neighborhood, teaching free design workshops for kids who reminded him of himself. He hired his mother's former co-workers from the cleaning service to help with model building, paying them 3 times what they'd made scrubbing floors. And every year on the anniversary of receiving that letter, he visited Eleanor Morrison at her firm in San Francisco. She was in her 70s now, still working, still believing that architecture could change lives. Their conversations ranged from design philosophy to the obligations of privilege to the cosmic mathematics of paying forward grace. "Why me?" Daniel asked her once during his junior year. "That day at the market you saw hundreds of people. Why did you choose to invest in me?" Eleanor smiled, the same wind chime laugh he remembered. "Because you weren't selling toys, Daniel. You were selling dreams, yours and your mother's. And because when I asked what you wanted to be, you didn't say rich or famous. You said you wanted to build safety. In a world this harsh, anyone who wants to build safety is worth believing in." By the time Daniel graduated, top of his class, multiple job offers from prestigious firms, his mother was healthy, working part-time at a nonprofit she actually cared about. They lived in a small but beautiful apartment near campus, with a garden where Maria grew tomatoes and herbs, where she could rest in the sun and watch her son's impossible dreams become inevitable reality. But Daniel hadn't forgotten the other part of his story, the part with sharp edges and bitter words. He was 25 years old when he finally returned to New York City, not as the cardboard boy from the alley, but as the lead architect on a revolutionary project. A sustainable housing development designed for low-income families, funded by a coalition of progressive investors who believed that dignity shouldn't require wealth. The project was generating national attention. Major publications were calling it the future of urban design. Beautiful, affordable, community-centered. And it was being built in a neighborhood the city had long forgotten, transforming blocks of abandoned buildings into a thriving community. The press conference was held on-site, surrounded by the steel bones of buildings that would soon house families who'd never imagined they could live somewhere so beautiful. Reporters crowded around, cameras flashing, asking Daniel about his vision, his process, his unprecedented approach to affordable design. That's when he saw Victor Ashford standing at the back of the crowd. Victor looked different, older, obviously, but also diminished somehow. The cocky confidence had been replaced by something harder to name. His suit, while expensive, hung slightly wrong, as if he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. He wasn't wearing his characteristic smirk. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Victor approached. Daniel's bodyguard, yes, he had a bodyguard now, a consequence of minor celebrity, moved to intercept, but Daniel waved him off. "Victor," he said evenly, "it's been a while. 8 years." Victor's voice was rough, lacking its old polish. I've been following your career. Everyone has. You're kind of a big deal now." "Things change," Daniel said carefully, unsure where this was going. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They do. My father's company went bankrupt 2 years ago. Turns out building luxury condos no one can afford isn't a sustainable business model when the economy crashes. He lost everything. The house, the cars, the reputation. He paused. I lost my college fund, my trust fund, my certainty that the world would always catch me if I fell. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. Not satisfaction, as he might have expected, but an aching recognition. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Are you? Victor met his eyes, and Daniel saw something he'd never seen there before. Humility. I was cruel to you, that day in the rain and 100 other times. I thought you were nothing because you had nothing. I thought poverty was a moral failing, not a circumstance. My father taught me that, and I believed him because it made me feel powerful. He gestured at the construction site around them. But here you are, building something that actually matters while I'm working retail, Daniel, at a mall, making $9 an hour. And you know what I realized? I deserved every single word I said to you that night. Because I don't have vision. I don't see things differently. I only ever saw what my father taught me to see. The old Daniel, the 12-year-old boy in the rain, might have wanted this moment, might have wanted to see Victor brought low. But the man Daniel had become, the architect who'd learned that foundations mattered more than facades, felt something different. Victor, can I tell you something? Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Victor could hear. That day in the rain, you were right about one thing. I was building a cardboard kingdom. But the thing about kingdoms built from scraps is that you learn how to build. You learn that beauty doesn't require wealth. You learn that dignity is something you create, not something you inherit. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You lost your advantages and you think that means you're nothing. But advantages were never who you were, they were just what you had. Now you get to figure out who you actually are without them. And that's not a punishment, Victor. That's an opportunity. Victor's eyes were wet. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to start. Daniel pulled a business card from his pocket. Not his own, but one for the community center where he volunteered, teaching design workshops for kids from backgrounds like his. Start here. They need volunteers to mentor kids, help with homework, teach them to see possibility in scraps. The pay is terrible. The hours are worse. But you'll learn what I learned. That purpose doesn't come from having more than other people. It comes from using whatever you have to make things better. Victor took the card with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? After everything Because someone helped me when I had nothing, Daniel interrupted. And she taught me that grace isn't a transaction. It's a cycle. You receive it, you grow from it, and then you pass it forward. He smiled. Besides, I know something about people that my old friend Eleanor taught me. We're all just trying to find our way home. Some of us just take longer routes than others. The development was completed 18 months later, and Daniel's mother cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. Maria Reyes, wearing a dress she'd picked out herself from a store she'd once only cleaned, stood before the crowd of families who would live in these buildings and said 6 words that made her son cry. Welcome home. You deserve this beauty. The first family to move in was a single mother with 2 children, working 3 jobs, barely scraping by. Daniel gave her the tour personally, showing her the garden space, the community center, the details he'd designed specifically for people who needed more than shelter. They needed home. How can we afford this? The woman asked, looking around the beautiful apartment with obvious disbelief. It's affordable by design, Daniel explained. Sustainable materials, efficient systems, community support. Beauty doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be intentional. That night, after the ceremonies and celebrations, Daniel returned to the development alone. He walked through the gardens, past playgrounds where children would soon play, beneath streetlights designed to make people feel safe, not surveilled. He thought about that boy in the rain, collecting cardboard in the dark. He thought about his mother's bent back and raw hands. He thought about Eleanor Morrison's unexpected grace. And he thought about Victor Ashford, who'd started volunteering at the community center and, according to the director, was actually quite good with the kids, who was learning slowly that purpose was better than power. Daniel pulled out his phone and sent a text to Eleanor. The first families moved in today. I wish you could have been here. Her response came immediately. I was there. In every window, every garden, every detail you designed with love. That's how grace works, Daniel. It echoes. He looked up at the buildings rising against the night sky. Not cardboard now, but steel and stone and glass, solid and real and permanent. Homes for people who'd been told they didn't deserve them. Beauty for those who'd been taught to expect nothing. The cardboard crown he'd built as a boy hadn't crumbled after all. It had just been the blueprint for something larger, something that would outlast him, something that would shelter others the way he'd once needed shelter. Standing there in the garden of the world he'd built from scraps, Daniel Reyes felt something he'd searched for his entire life, the quiet certainty of being home. 10 years later, Daniel stood in the backyard of a house he designed specifically for his mother. A small masterpiece in Northern California, surrounded by gardens, filled with light, every detail crafted with love. Maria was inside, gray-haired now but healthy, hosting a dinner for the extended family of immigrants and dreamers and believers who'd supported them along the way. Eleanor Morrison had passed away 2 years prior, leaving Daniel not just her firm but her mission. To invest in young architects from overlooked communities, to multiply grace, to build a world where shelter was a right, not a luxury. Victor Ashford was there too, now the director of the youth program at the community center, married to a teacher he'd met while volunteering, with a daughter who loved building things from cardboard. He and Daniel had become, improbably, friends, not close ones, but real ones, bonded by the understanding that redemption was possible and transformation was the work of a lifetime. As the sun set over the garden, Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from a high school student he'd been mentoring, a girl from El Salvador whose family cleaned office buildings, who wanted to be an architect, who reminded him so much of himself it hurt. Mr. Reyes, the message read, I got into the summer program at Stanford. I don't know how I'll afford it, but I got in. Thank you for believing in me. Daniel smiled and typed back, check your email. The Eleanor Morrison Foundation Scholarship is waiting for you. And when you succeed, not if, but when, you'll help someone else. That's how we build the future, one dream at a time. He put his phone away and looked at the house he'd built, at the people he loved gathering inside it, at the gardens where beauty grew from intention and care. He thought about that boy in the rain, about the man who'd mocked him, about all the long miles between poverty and purpose. And he understood, finally, what his mother and Eleanor had been trying to teach him all along. The world isn't divided into people who have and people who have not. It's divided into people who hoard and people who plant, people who diminish others and people who multiply grace. The rich man had mocked the poor boy, yes, but the boy had built something the rich man never could. A life that mattered, a legacy of lifting others, a foundation strong enough to hold not just himself but everyone who came after him. In the end, roles didn't reverse. They evolved. And Daniel Reyes, architect of homes and harbinger of hope, had built something far more valuable than wealth or revenge. He'd built a world where the next generation of cardboard kings could become builders of the future, where dreams weren't limited by circumstances, where dignity was designed into every detail, where home was a promise kept. And that, he thought as he walked inside to join his family, was the only architecture that truly mattered. We live in a world that teaches us to measure worth by wealth, to conflate advantage with virtue, to believe that those who struggle deserve their struggle. But the truth, the beautiful, difficult truth, is that circumstances are not character, and poverty is not a moral failing. Daniel's story reminds us that grace is not transactional but cyclical, that the kindness we extend ripples outward in ways we cannot predict, that the seeds we plant may bloom in gardens we'll never see. His mother taught him resilience. Eleanor Morrison taught him that belief in others is an investment with incalculable returns. And even Victor, in his humbling, taught him that redemption is always possible for those willing to do the work of becoming. The question this story poses isn't whether life is fair. Clearly, it often isn't. The question is, when we are given more than we need, do we hoard it or plant it? When we are given less than we deserve, do we become bitter or better? When we see someone struggling, do we mock them or extend our hand? The architecture of a good life isn't about the grandeur of what we build for ourselves. It's about the foundations we lay for others, the shelter we provide for those still standing in the rain, the beauty we insist is possible even when the world says only some people deserve it. We are all, in the end, building something. The only question is whether we're building walls or homes, towers or communities, monuments to ourselves or gardens where others can grow. Choose grace. Choose generosity. Choose to be the person who plants trees in whose shade you may never sit. Because someday, someone will remember you not for what you had, but for what you gave. Not for how high you climbed, but for how many hands you reached back to lift. And that is the only legacy worth building.